Welcome to Demystifying Tech, a business cloud podcast which examines the impact of technology on industry and wider society. In each episode, a technologist from one of the UK's most innovative companies will break down a key area of tech and offer practical takeaways for your business. In this episode, we are joined by INEVITABLE CEO Ben Grubert. INEVITABLE aims to make innovative technologies, such as machine learning, accessible to all, working with startups and larger enterprises to develop ethical artificial intelligence. Today, Ben will help us to define AI, discuss the hot topic of generative AI such as ChatGPT, explain the rapidly evolving regulatory landscape, and consider how you can harness AI within your business in a responsible way. So, Ben, big question to start. Define artificial intelligence in a nutshell for our audience, please.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
Okay.
And also how has it evolved over the decades?
So it is better to describe it as an evolving discipline, in the same way that science is, in general. The first premise was set down by Alan Turing, the same guy who, from the whole Enigma, imitation game movie. So he's the father of computer science. His original premise was if you can describe humans experiencing the world as ingesting information, doing some form of calculation, and then outputting some form of result or decision, then why can't computers do the same? And that was the original premise of it. It's come a long way since the 1950s. However, there's a couple of working definitions to do with the emulation of human-like decision-making and learning and so on and so forth. But one of my favorite definitions is from a guy called Larry Tesler, which he says that AI is whatever we haven't already done yet. And that kind of, it's a kind of humanized definition of it. And it explains the reasons why it always feels like we've always had AI, but it's always changing and always feels like we're just about to have AI as well. And the reason why is because what we haven't realistically done in a particularly good way is define levels of the automation of what kinds of decision making we're doing and what kind of problem sets and what kind of tasks we're actually managing to complete. And as a result, in the 80s, we kind of went through feed-forward neural networks and so on. That had this like big boom and proliferation. And now we're coming to the point where more and more tasks, the things that we actually interact with all AI all the time. But things like predictive text messages right the way through to Spotify recommendations. And it's quite often the thing that automates something, some component of a process that we already engage with. But it's always getting better. And obviously large language models are now just a part of that evolving process. AI mostly these days is a facet of computer science and data science in particular, where you take a bunch of data that has within it both the problem and the solution, and you essentially just use automated statistics to build a model, which can then, when given a new problem that's contained within that data set, spit out some form of solution. And that defines machine learning, deep learning, and that kind of the areas that they call stochastic AI. But it's obviously come a long way. The real trick is to know where it's going next, and what to do about that.
Where it's going at the moment is OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google Bard. So these large language models, which, ChatGPT launched late last year and seems to have taken over, doesn't it? So, everyone's, putting prompts in and trying to generate, copy for an event. It can obviously develop software programs by using the prompts as well. I saw that there was one company that's actually hired a ChatGPT expert, someone whose explicit position is to just literally use ChatGPT to develop their business. So can you just sort of sum up for us where we were, let's say November last year, and where we are now with these models?
One thing I kind of want to point out is that the large language models, or the particular algorithms behind the data sets, we've kind of had this technology for some time, but all of a sudden it's the proliferation of that, as in the public are waking up to this. But we've this is a technology that we've been looking at for some time, and evaluating, signing up to the betas and kind of keeping track of that. But generative, it's actually something that we started looking into generative, the combination of machine learning and generative algorithms way back in 2018. We put a really big bet on that one in particular, because we knew that was going to be the kind of the most successful technology that's likely to come out of this. But it has made a huge impact, and more importantly, it definitely, we haven't seen the bottom of that. The technology has had particularly web-based technologies have had a huge, there's this kind of motion that happens where a large technology or game-changing technology will come out, and then to a degree, big I innovation, that kind of the same innovation that caused that to happen, kind of stops in that area. Then we end up with this proliferation of technology. So I like to think of kind of large language models like ChatGPT as the equivalent to the search engines that caused the dot-com boom, and kind of came out around that and supported that during the sort of the web, Web 1 to Web 2.0 days. And that's a good analogy realistically, because it's the way that humans interact with the technology that's most interesting. But it does, these large language models do have the ability to not just kind of break the internet, as it were, but potentially, and this is the research that we've been doing, is it has a potential to actually become kind of the next backbone of the internet intrinsically, which is very interesting. Definitely don't have time to go into that in detail, but yeah, just to do with the way that they interact and the protocols behind them.
So I've just been writing a story up today with a company called N8. So they've released a version of their workflow orchestration platform called N8 AI. And what they do is it basically massively increases the ability to kind of categorize emails, for example, auto-generate responses, and means that you don't need to use as much of your resource to kind of monitor those platforms and monitor the training of it, if you like, and how it delivers it. It just kind of works. So rather than just looking at OpenAI or ChatGPT as this massive platform which will do everything, it's actually the integration of models like that into existing companies, and companies are getting more able to kind of augment what they're already doing, right?
Yeah, and that's what I'm describing as the proliferation of technology. It's companies onboarding it, finding use cases for that, exploring that, and it's going to hit a natural plateau in that kind of proliferation, in its own sense. But the general thrust is that it's kind of taking more of a computer science minded approach towards businesses. Why do something once when why do something every time when you can do it once properly? And that's the kind of solving new and novel problems, which is the kind of the movement from there. If that kind of responds to your statement.
So let's talk a little bit about Inevitable. So you're based in Manchester. As you said, you and Sean O'Mahony sort of founded it in 2018, took a bit of a gamble. You said, AI, a gamble that wasn't really a gamble because you knew AI was going to be the big technology. What's your expertise? So
we research new forms of AI, or how to build AI in new and innovative ways. Which means that's the reason why we're always looking at the kind of the bleeding edge of that tech. So new machine learning algorithms, new processes, and particularly the conjunction between, we've been very, very good at the conjunction between machine learning and bordering technologies such as generative algorithms, quantum, so on and so forth. But that's what we did towards the end of 2019. We put this really big bet on that particular intersection of technologies, because we kind of thought that would be the case, and we came to develop an algorithmic approach, which meant that we could create AI models which are more powerful from the same data, or build a scalable solution from far less data, just because of the kind of algorithms that we developed. Because we look, in comparison to other data science companies, we also take that kind of very granular approach, but we also look at the kind of overarching strategy. And we develop, now we develop artificial intelligence for businesses that are looking for a competitive advantage. And we're able to bring a scalable system now to companies, no matter what sort of stage they're at, from startups right the way through to kind of large enterprises. Because of that ability to look at the bigger picture, and because of the efficient algorithms that we have and process that we have that brings that. That means that we can build AI and AI responsibly for them. So that's the meat and potatoes of it. We also do a little bit for sort of research specifically, as well as due diligence for investors and so on and so forth. Because there's a lot of that in the business world where companies will say, "Oh, we've got AI that does this." It's easy to bring us in for that kind of topic, and quite often we go, "Well, okay, maybe they haven't done it, but the good news is this is how they can." So that's the kind of thing that we do. And we have a platform that allows businesses to have that scalability from the offset.
We spoke in a previous interview, and the example you gave to me was how an AI image recognition system might identify a chair differently to a 3-year-old child, if they were doing that same task. It's all about context, isn't it? So contextualization and actually the granular level of detail that you guys go into, understanding all the moving parts within an AI, means that you can actually create it ethically. It's not just an overarching tool, isn't it? So can you just explain a little bit more about that for us?
So specifically with regards to context, so this is something that's quite accessible if you think about it. Context is absolutely key to the way we learn, both human learning and machine learning. A single data point without context can't actually convey any information whatsoever. Realistically, it's the fact that we are able to contextualize that information that leverages that and allows us to be able to imbue rules and things that we understand as rules and properties that allow us to be able to extrapolate and generalize that into a sort of greater depth of knowledge. So a child the way that a child learns, and this is to a degree, I will happily have long conversations about this and straight up arguments with certain people, on this kind of topic. But it's the information that's come to that child in advance of that allows the child to be able to take on this new information and imbue that a chair is a chair for a given value of chair, and a chair is imbued by the properties of its use cases. And as a result, it can learn from significantly lower data sets and not be confused by a beanbag. In comparison, an image recognition system will learn, classically will learn in total isolation. And as a result, it is looking for those granular details and picking that out. And, there were lots of examples of things that happened in lots of the pictures, but weren't appropriate because it was picking the wrong context. So for instance, there was an image recognition system that was built which identifying sheep and started identifying all stone walls as sheep. Because the image set that was being created, how it was created for that, had lots of dry stone walls in the background, and that's an important point. But going into that, understanding that level of granularity allows, in the way that the information is conveyed, means that we can be very, very surgically precise in the information that is being used, is being collected, to ensure that from the absolute beginning, to ensure that there's that the system that can come out of that is ethical from the outset. Because perhaps this is slightly naive, but when we advise on a business, the majority of the businesses will take an ethical approach when they're given the option to do so. What they don't tend to do is, unfortunately, once it gets to a point where it's too late, that's when they won't. If they've already built something, they kind of dump down after that point. So early intervention is kind of key there.
A little bit like building a business in such a way that when you come down the line, you're not, let's say that you were looking to raise investment or sell your business, you wouldn't want to get tripped up by the unknown. You've made an unethical decision almost by accident. Same thing with AI, right? You need to understand it or work with people who do understand it, apply it in the areas where it needs to be applied, collect the data in an ethical way. And actually, as you go forward, you can kind of iterate upon how you use it along as well as you go. But if you're trying to do like a wholesale application at the outset, when you go further down the line, you might be screwed, right?
Once again, context is key. If you try and take an iterative approach and learn as you go, there's a lot that you end up missing. You end up kind of playing this kind of weird technical debt whack-a-mole where you build something and then find out that you've created another problem, so on from there. So the best way to talk about tech, AI, and ethics, you can't really do so without talking about things like bias, and there are certain checks and balances that need to be put in place. And so we never ever build artificial intelligence using a one-person team. For instance, it is the bias of the people who are working with the data is intrinsically important. So as a result, a diverse team of individuals that are capable of checking each other's bias has to be part of that, because you can't check your own unconscious bias by definition, or at least we haven't worked out a way to do that as of yet. And I'm not saying that we get everything right, but it's like cybersecurity. The first step is to do it, and is to think about it. And you have to build that in as the approach. My concerns is that that's not necessarily being built in. It's not being enforced, built in, or put into our culture of development. That would be a great idea.
What I liked when we had our conversation before was how you said that you dedicate a large amount of your time to R&D, to thinking about AI and getting that approach right. One of the things that you just mentioned there was about the ethical side of things as well, was where looking at the unconscious bias. That leads us nicely onto our reader questions, where one of the questions that came through was, is AI going to end the world? Which slightly facetious maybe, but on a serious note, what are the dangers posed by its sudden growth? Because what is the AI being trained on is one.
There are some serious concerns. I'm not going to muck about on that. However, there's a lot of misconceptions as to where those concerns lie. I give a talk and it kind of starts off with, there is a struggle right now concerning AI, but it's got nothing to do with Skynet. We should say, for the benefit of the younger listeners, that we're talking about Terminator here. We are referring to Terminator, yes. But the important part is when you automate human decision making, and then you place that into an algorithm, that then it does so by often taking the previous decisions that were made. If we take something like tech recruitment, for instance, or any recruitment, the data sets that are often required in order to do that go historically. And what is ethical now isn't what was ethical then. And when you really scrutinize that, you find that even now there's a huge amount of bias within those decision making. And we're coming to the point where artificial intelligence has this huge power, this huge ability to be able to create equitable services, and to be able to, because we're finally getting to the point where we're actually being able to look at the intrinsic flaws in human decision making, and by analyzing that directly, we can create systems which do not have those. There's an interesting case, State versus Loomis, to do with recidivism, which anybody can look up themselves. But the takeaway from that was that a judge handing out prison sentences, when they looked into it, they found that there was huge amounts of bias that were being placed into that decision-making process. And secondary to the action that was done, the crime that was actually committed, the only other the second biggest factor was the ethnicity of the individual that was being sentenced. Now, once you understand that, if you collect those properties and you make sure that is rather than simply not collecting those properties, you ensure that isn't something that factors in, but it's intrinsically or by proxy, like postcode or something. Then you're able to create something that is capable of creating a fair, equitable, repeatable service that actually, in a way, out-ethics humans, because it's very difficult for any judge to be able to hand out that kind of same transparent decision-making process. But the dangers to do with sudden proliferation and sudden growth are that we don't seem to be able right now to focus on the problems, to ensure that the businesses that are creating these AI systems are doing so and putting the right checks and balances in place. They're very easy to do, but there isn't any intrinsic reason for them to do so.
And mitigate against some of those potential issues. Regulation is key, and a lot of politicians have been playing lip service to this. So, in the UK, we're going to be hosting a summit on AI later this year. James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, was talking about it in New York recently when he chaired a United Nations Council meeting, Security Council meeting. But this guy, N8, Kit Cox, that I referenced earlier, one of the things he said is, I really don't think the UK government in particular appreciates what's coming down the line and the wide-scale disruption that's coming. Do you think that the UK's approach to regulation is effective, and how does it differ to those of other countries? That is a reader question, not one of mine, so I can't take credit for it.
Well, it's a very good question.
I take the credit for the very long intro. I apologise for that.
Of course. Now, okay, the UK is the easiest comparison between the UK legislation and the sort of stance and the strategy that we're taking would be to compare it against the EU. The EU have taken a very firm and very prescriptive approach. They've developed a list of things which are considered unacceptable, and they have outlawed those things. Now, the whole point is to create versions of things like the ICO specifically for this particular type of regulation to be enforced. Now, by placing things that are off the table and implementing a risk-based strategy to ensure that all companies that implement artificial intelligence place their work on this risk register, so that they're able, as in their own risk register, so that they're able to mitigate those worst effects and quantify that and work through it. There's a dynamic approach that's capable of being created, and which it does work. In comparison, the UK is taking more of an approach which works within the current legal frameworks. So, for instance, the idea being, instead of creating a new ICO, we go, well, actually, transparent decision making and transparent data processing is something that is more relevant to GDPR. Technically, GDPR states that you essentially outlaws deep learning networks because you're unable to show how you're processing data. Now, that's the kind of the thought process behind that, and it means that we're taking a more kind of flexible approach where we allow for those kind of those problems to emerge, but without closing the door on big innovations. Which is it is an interesting approach. It's aligned with the kind of make Britain a global superpower, AI superpower, kind of national tech strategy, rather than outlawing things. Now, there is a concern that obviously that means that we're essentially, in a way, waiting for the Titanic to sink. The first one, then we go and would tell people when to, how many lifeboats to build, and we legislate for that. So my concern, because we work with a lot of startups, is when you're faced with building tech and you're building a tech-based startup, you have this enormous blue sky. You can do any problem that you can think of, you can solve to a certain degree that's within your capability. So there's nothing wrong with saying, well, here's a concrete foundation of stuff for you to just avoid, and just to give that certainty. That kind of helps to a degree. What doesn't give certainty is saying, well, it might become illegal later, and that's the kind of thing that's so there will be, from company to company, there's a business risk around things which violate the EU regulation. So the chances are most smart, savvy companies will build their artificial intelligence such that it is conformant to EU regulation anyway. However, without that being enforced in the UK as of yet, on the assumption that they're either going to expand into the EU or that it's going to come into effect anyway. So that's a good approach to make. Or alternatively, you take the kind of high risk strategy and build something which is classically considered unethical, because most of the EU legislation is kind of ruling out things like emotional regulation within border control. Emotional recognition in border control systems, or it talks about creating using artificial intelligence for changing voter perspectives in political situations. As far as I'm concerned, it wouldn't be a terrible idea for us to kind of legislate against that sort of stuff. We might as well do so.
It's a very complex subject for even us to understand, never mind the politicians who don't know anything about tech. This is the part of the pod where we ask you for your tech takeaways. A few quick fire tips for businesses looking to harness AI in an ethical and responsible way. What are your quick tech takeaways?
I'm not sure if I can do anything quickly.
This is it. We could go down some rabbit holes, you and I, and we have done in the past.
Oh, we have. So my tech takeaways. First and foremost, assume that what is considered ethical now will be considered legal later. It is, there's no point in flying close to the wind. There's so much value that can be created by a system without violating ethics. Then I don't see any particular reason not to do so. And it's better to be able to create something now than to have to retrofit or adapt that later. It's just smart. And there's a lot of, if you're a startup, investors don't tend to want to get involved in systems which will later become sort of ethical problem, there will be ethical problems with them later. So it is something that they do take into account, the kind of the popular mindset of that, even if they're unaware of it. That's number one. Number two, we don't know. So you've been mentioning GPT. Yes, that is the one that everyone's discussing at the moment. However, OpenAI's creator said that he thinks that we've hit a plateau and there aren't going to be any more large language models. Of course, if I was him, I would say that, wouldn't I? Now, however, we genuinely don't know, out of all of the large language models, whether GPT is going to be the next Google, and it's going to be the search engine, the version of a search engine which builds the next backbone of the internet, or whether it's going to be the next Yahoo. We don't know. We don't know, videotape, Betamax, and that's the kind of the same analogy, right? So I would suggest that if you're going to build now and you're building your tech stack on something, on other technologies such as large language models like that, to build flexibly, to ensure that you're able to keep up with the moving tech. My next one is there's this chicken and egg problem with regards to data, AI. You need data in order to build the AI, you need AI to be able to deliver the service in order to get the data. There are ways to avoid to get into that and to avoid to kind of not get into that chicken and egg problem. But they all start at the having that skill set. So it's a good idea to build it into your strategy where this AI is going to come from, making sure that you are collecting the right data and you're doing so in an ethical manner so that you're able to deliver that service. So avoid that chicken and egg problem of data. The next one is stay on top of AI. There are certain services which died out during the .com boom. It's a good idea it's better to self-disrupt than to be disrupted. So stay on top of AI, and it's with all of those kind of changes, it's a good idea to get early advice. From startups building their tech from the ground up, or taking existing businesses and converting the strategy. I would rather give free advice to somebody for 20 minutes, a couple of hours, I'd rather do that than be brought in later after someone's kind of tried to do this kind of weird whack-a-mole approach and they've gone down this created this massive knotty problem later on. And as a result, you can plan everything out prior to committing and prior to go for funding if that's the route that you were looking to go down. I'm happy to give advice. I'd rather do so. Or reach out to anybody that really knows their stuff and make sure that they know their stuff. Trigger word. Anybody who says AI is complicated, that's just shorthand for they don't know what they're talking about.
My trigger word is whack-a-mole. I'm going to go straight from this interview, and I'm going to go and play whack-a-mole in a local arcade.
Right. Tell me
something about yourself or your business that might surprise me. Is our last final question.
I'm just. It's my role at INEVITABLE to be the mouthpiece. I'm only one member of the team, so I'd rather go from the whole team's perspective. So one thing that would surprise people, I guess, to a certain degree, is we named our company by writing an algorithm. That was the approach that we took from the outset, and I think that to a degree it kind of tracks with the way that we do absolutely everything else. But I guess it's not that big a deal necessarily to do that now, maybe, but it certainly was in 2018. So, that's our thing.
I remember the days of generating a Wu-Tang. What is your Wu-Tang clan name? And things like that.
Yeah.
That's back in the early days. Listen, Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure, sharing your insight into artificial intelligence, how businesses can adopt AI in a responsible way, and trying to just explain a little bit more about how you need to kind of go under the hood and go down to that granular level of detail to understand the mechanisms of AI and make sure that it's used appropriately in the right places instead of just trying this overarching approach, which just leaves you stranded down the line.
You've got to build it into your business strategy. This isn't just tech for the cupboard anymore. This is something that, in the same way that a business owner would have to learn how to use a financial forecast, you have to know how you're going to adopt it, built so that you don't have to know all of the algorithms behind that, but you do have to know how you're going to be using it within your business strategy. That's the super important bit.
Yeah. If anyone's getting feedback on today's episode, you can contact Business Cloud on LinkedIn or Twitter/X, whatever we're calling it these days. You can comment on the video episode of the podcast on YouTube. You can also drop us an email at podcasts@businesscloud.co.uk. If you enjoyed the episode and found it useful, please like and subscribe on your preferred platform, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, or your usual podcatchers, to be among the first to hear more insights from renowned UK technologists. Thank you for listening, and see you soon. Demystifying Tech is a Business Cloud podcast produced in partnership with pan-European B2B tech PR and communications agency Tyto. New episodes are streamed on Business Cloud's YouTube, LinkedIn and Twitter pages from 12 p.m. on the second Friday of every month, while you can find all episodes on YouTube and all major audio podcast platforms. Subscribe now so you never miss an episode.